30 Days of Night, the 2007 movie review and thoughts. So, this was requested by longtime supporter, like more than 6 years, my friend and frequent commenter Arts Cafe, who pointed out this is a far better film than 1987's Near Dark when requesting I do this one in the comments section of that one. I'm afraid I forgot who it was who said it, but someone pointed out that the vampires being so animalistic here compared to the usual for the time, elegant, able to pass for human, may be in response to zombies, if that's what we're going to call them, from 28 Days Later being aggressive compared to Romero zombies. And this also feels somewhat inspired by Blade 2, Guillermo del Toro's approach to vampires, where they are not these sexy, seductive, cultured individuals, but rather much more monstrous. Nobody's falling in love with the vampire in this. And the fact that this movie came out literally a year before the first Twilight movie does in a funny way make it feel like they're intentionally presenting competing perspectives of vampires. After all, the Stephenie Meyer vampire is just the version of the classic ones that is presumed most likely to be appealing to a young woman. And to be clear, I'm not saying that either of these approaches is wrong. It tickles my fancy that they came out so close to each other. I adore the childlike wonder with which they approach the concept of 30 Days of Night, where from one day to the next, it just immediately goes from normal sunny day to constant darkness, as if that at all resembles how it does happen in real life. Like, that is... There's nothing quite like Hollywood. It's just like, yeah, I mean, that's how... it's like written by people who don't really know. They haven't really heard of a place where there's that much darkness, which, to be fair and clear, fair and balanced, I wasn't familiar with it before watching this movie either. But when I saw them do that, make that particular choice, and it is very much a choice, it's an interesting choice. Yeah, I was thinking, like, there's no way that's how it actually works. So I looked it up, and yeah, it's not. And let's see. Yeah, this movie came out at a time when comic book movies that were based on superhero and anti-hero stories sometimes really struggled. The MCU hadn't come around and created the solid formula yet. This movie actually does quite well as a comic book adaptation. The level of gore and violence is like a comic book, more than a movie that is in no way like a comic book. And, yeah, because of physical pain, I was not able to carefully read the original comic. I did skim. It does look like they did a great job capturing the full thing with toned-down colors, except for the intense blood red, and also the plentiful gore and violence. Now, let's see. There's a bunch of different things to say about this. I suppose I will start with some context. So, this came out at a time when horror movies were very much hit and miss, and I suppose there is an argument that that's always been the case. But yeah, like this, I think the end of the 80s was probably the last time where, yeah, there were some real clunkers back then as well, but just I suppose the approach to making horror in Hollywood, yeah, like, they understood certain things that were then forgotten in the 90s. The 90s brought about stuff like MTV editing, which works for, yeah, MTV music videos, and there are some action movies that, so I maintain, I know not everybody agrees, I do think the frenetic style of the Crank movies serve those movies rather well. Perhaps not as much by the time of Gamer, but horror movies just really don't, like, fairly rarely, let's go with that, fairly rarely and barely is it good for a horror movie to have that kind of editing. I think perhaps one of the most overt examples I can think of is a movie that I still maintain is not as bad as others make it out to be. I'll Always Know What You Did Last Summer, which remains such a silly title. I really think they, right from the start, the first movie should have been called I Know What You Did Summer of '97. Because then the second would, could have been I Still Know What You Did Summer of '97, and I mean, the third one is no longer about the summer of '97, but let's see. Was it set around the time? I'll always know what you did summer of 2006, or it was somewhere around there, you know. But that one, like, there's this very flashy, like, literally editing during some of the, like, stalking scenes, and it kind of, I don't know. It's not optimal. I don't think it's as bad as others think, but I can do without it, you know. And yes, I realize I was talking about the '90s, and now I'm talking about a 2000 mid 2000s movie. But yeah, from the '90s, from probably the start of the '90s, and you know, yeah, I think the 2010s got it back on course. But I will admit I have not been keeping up with horror the way I used to in the last couple decades. But the '90s, in addition to this editing, it also went. Oh, right, and yeah, one of the last horror movies that is 100% an exception to this is actually Jacob's Ladder, which I did. You know, let's see, was that last week? It was recently, certainly. Which was also a request by Arts Cafe, and yeah, I gotta commend him. Really great ratio. I have liked and or loved, I think, pretty much every single thing he's recommended. So yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, the you know, yeah, Jacob's Ladder also gets it right, but yeah, the '90s, and it wasn't just horror movies, but there was an over reliance on CGI, and it doesn't exactly help matters that the CGI was just rarely completely convincing. There was always something wonky about it, you know. It still wouldn't have been okay how much they used it, how much they relied on it. There would be like scenes where it's like we're just watching special effects for minutes, and it's like, I get that you no longer have to cut to stuff like reaction shots, stuff that grounds it and reminds us this is happening to people. We're not just watching special effects. That was a thing that was necessitated back when they couldn't just show, you know, it used to be that you couldn't show any effect for like a minute without having to cut away to get to the next, so that, you know, before you cut back, not literally, but yeah, so that they cut back to something that is like the next stage of the effect, you know. That was not necessary when, you know, CGI became, you know, prominent in use, if not necessarily excellent in quality. And so they kind of forgot that there's the, you know, it's a good thing to do. It's, you know, yeah, for reasons I have just explained, so I will move on. Those were some of the biggest problems. Yeah, another major issue with horror of this time was the fact that they could make them bigger, you know, and faster in pacing. Yeah, they kind of just went whole hog, and again, like, a lot of the scariest stuff is actually not when it's like a lot, but when there's just like one thing that is extremely, like, just, yeah, something that really gets to you. You know, you can, like, at least at the same time, you know, if you go and study the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, and I 100% recommend that you do, feel free to skip 5, 6, and definitely the remake, but other than those, you know, they really nailed it, because over the course of one of those movies, and pretty much any one of those movies, there's a lot of different things, but they understand that they need to space them out a little bit. Because if you just throw everything at the audience, like, one of the major things about horror is that anything that's scary can be comedic if you push it too far. And that's what and that's fine if that's what you're trying to do. That's something Sam Raimi excelled at with, you know, the Evil Dead movies, you know, and Ash versus Evil Dead. But yeah, which actually, you know, this movie was shot in New Zealand, same as that show, and both of them feature Joel Tobic, if that's how you pronounce his name. And I definitely do think, you know, this does not have the hyperkinetic camera work of the Evil Dead trilogy and other Sam Raimi, you know, movies, but it does, yeah, it was produced by, I want to say it's called Ghost House, the studio that Sam Raimi and Rob Tappert run, or, you know, at least ran at the time. Yeah, I think it is still going, but I haven't checked. But yeah, I don't know exactly how much hands-on Sam Raimi was for this, because I don't think he appeared at all in the behind the scenes, and he's not exactly camera shy. But certainly it seems like Bob Tappert was fairly involved, and he was also part of shaping those other Sam Raimi movies. Yeah, those Sam Raimi movies. And yeah, there is definitely, you know, some... If I had to compare it to any Sam Raimi movie, it's probably especially the original Evil Dead. So there's not a huge amount of humor, but there's the kind of bleakness bordering on outright nihilism, and, you know, these really, really cruel movie monsters that, you know, they're not quite like classic. They're a little, yeah, a little bit more comic booky. You know, this EC Comics kind of vibe. To be clear, I'm not saying that the comic this was based on was EC Comics, but there's some inspiration there, I would argue. And yeah, this is not quite as gnarly in the. It gets gnarly. It's not quite as gooey when it gets gory as the original Evil Dead. Now, let's see. I think that pretty much covers... Yeah, so during the 90s, you know, I do maintain the first two Scream movies were solid. And as mentioned, I do have a fondness for... Well, I mentioned the third one. I have a fondness for the entire... Know What You Did, you know, last summer trilogy. But yeah, other than that, there were a lot of really bad ones for the reasons that I've mentioned. You know, got your Lawnmower Men. You've got, you know, the haunting. Let's see, Haunting of Hill House and the House on Haunted Hill. No, yeah, it's something like that. You know, both of those. You know, I don't think I ever did watch the original of Haunting on... Yeah, one of the originals featured Vincent Price. I'd like to watch it. I love Vincent Price. Haven't found a copy, at least not on sale. I do love the original Haunting, and that's not the only reason that I hate the remake. Actually, I'm not entirely sure I had watched the original when I first watched the remake, so I don't even think that was a factor in my disdain of that movie. But yeah, just not particularly good movies, you know. And then you also had some stuff that was hampered by a PG-13, like the American remake of The Eye, you know, which just... The original, I want to say Chinese, is so much better. I'm not saying they were all bad, including the PG-13 ones, because, I mean, the American Grudge was not amazing, but the American Ring was, and, you know, part of that is that it understood that if you're going to do PG-13 horror, you better make it psychological horror, not, you know, I'm not sure I've seen, at least not many, really solid, straight horror movies, like, let's see, I guess... visceral horror, let's go with that, that were not at least rated R, that were really just, yeah. I think there was one more thing I wanted to say about that before I moved on. Let's see, right, yes, I know I should watch the original Japanese Grudge and Ringu. I did watch Ringu 2 and loved it. I would like to watch those other ones. Not sure I'm gonna commit to like reviews, because I'd probably want to do the entire series, and I feel like I think I heard that both of those have like a lot of movies. you know, it eventually there were a lot of, yeah. But yeah, this one really, really nails it. I really appreciate the way that they have a sort of mix of, like, overall, these are definitely not, this is not Bela Lugosi, or I hear Christopher Lee was also fairly, you know, could be perhaps not smooth, but there was, I've heard it described as there was an eroticism to his Dracula, you know. But they're not completely, like, you know, they're animalistic, but they're not quite like zombies either. That is, I will also admit, Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead, I have some issues with it. I might do a video on it at some point, but in the meantime, Maggie Mae Fish did fantastic on covering a lot of what I have issue with in that movie. I will admit, it's very effective as a horror movie, you know. But yeah, there is some, like, they're clearly intelligent. You know, the animalistic aspect is more in the behavior and some of the appearance, but they, you know, they have a language, for example. But yeah, and there's one scene where someone is surrounded by vampires in a scene that feels more like a classic vampire movie, but then there's also, you know, they move very fast, like zombies also did around this time. And I think that about covers. So yeah, this was shot on set, and I think that was the exact right decision because it gave them a tremendous amount of control. It allowed them to have the set look exactly the way they wanted it to. And yeah, from what I skimmed of the comic, it looks like it's a little, you know, in a lot of the comic, it's a little bit more like washed out because of the constant intense snow. But yeah, you know, you get a somewhat sense of it in the comic. Here, you get a really good look at how the town is set up, and it feels like a real town. And yeah, they weren't limited by what they could find. And it also meant that they could do pretty much anything because it's not like anybody lives here and they have to be careful about being able to repair stuff. And yeah, it shows. Like, at any point, someone might jump through a window or break down a door or, you know, yeah, stuff like that. And they shot a lot of it day for night. Apparently, I feel like I heard most of it, in fact. And I don't think there was ever a time where I felt like, okay, that was clearly a day for night shot, you know. Yeah, just they really managed to sell it. And yeah, like, almost, you know, a good chunk of the movie, I suppose I won't say exactly how much, but a good chunk of this movie is, you know, actually it's very dark out. Like, regardless of what time during the day a scene is set, it's going to be really dark out. And that does really have an effect on you. Like, I'm glad that, I think this movie, if you don't count the end credits, is like 102 or 3 minutes, thereabouts. I think if it was much longer, if it was 15 minutes longer, it would just be too draining. You know, there is, like, there's a reason that, you know, yeah, we tend to like sunlight, you know. Even if you're just watching a movie, it's uncomfortable because, like, our brain is telling us you gotta get some sunlight, you know. This is not healthy. And I think that is more or less it for that, right? On account of them shooting in New Zealand, some of the, you know, major characters are played by locals. One character is played, a character named Billy is played by Manu Bennett, who, other than this, I know primarily from the Hobbit trilogy. You know, he's the, I'm afraid I forget the name, but, you know, and risk too sore to look it up right now, but the lead orc, you know, with the arm thing. And yeah, right, another exception two bad, horror movies from around this time is the movie Daybreakers, which was actually also made by someone in the United Kingdom. I want to say those were Australians, and it actually it amuses me more than it should that these two movies are kind of photo negatives of each other than both being very high quality. In that one, you follow, the protagonist and a number of major characters are vampires. Where here, like, yeah, they have screen time, but they're not so much. The leader has some personality and character to him, but other than that, they don't have that much. That one is set in a big city rather than a small town. The struggle is vampires staying out of sunlight rather than humans trying to figure out a different way to kill vampires without sunlight. Yeah. And in that one, we're hoping that at least some of these vampires are turned rather than hoping none of the humans turn in this one. And also that one is quite progressive, which I do want to just briefly examine the fairly conservative, aspects of this, because I just realized I don't... Right, I meant to say at the top of this is a movie that I really, really enjoy. Actually, I suppose I have said that, anyway. This is one of those movies that has some conservative aspects, but I still really, really like it, despite how much I disagree with conservative ideology overall. This is one of those things where there's some movies, horror and action, certain horror and action movies benefit from being more conservative because, one of the reasons being that conservative ideology has more of this sense of, we just got to find the bad guy, the threat, and apply enough violence, and there's maybe a specific individual who excels at it, who needs to be let loose on that. And, this is not something I believe in real life. This is not how, problems are solved properly and long-term in real life, but it does, appeal to the lizard brain. It works well for horror and action. I go a little bit more into this in one of my videos on the movie Con Air, so I won't spend too much longer on it here, but I will just briefly talk about, in that I talk about it in a more general sense. Here I want to talk about this movie specifically when it comes to conservatism, because, and I think this is in part the fact that conservatives have really just completely gone off a cliff. When, they had a tenuous hold on logic since, like, Reagan, but, in the last, basically once, Obama was elected, they could not handle that an African American had, more power than a lot of, white voters, and yeah, they you could just look at the fact that as soon as he was no longer in office, they hurried up and, gave the job to one of the most mediocre white people in recent memory, a guy who's been failing upwards for his entire life. And I'm really hoping, it's the election's coming up, I'm really hoping they don't give him another term. At the very least with the whole Project 2025 thing. But yeah, this was before that, and as such, the conservatism here is much milder. But I do also, in addition to that, in general, yeah, this is not that intensely conservative of a film compared to some other stuff from this same time. It's not really particularly bigoted. Like, at most, like, I really racked my brain. I could see an argument that maybe the vampires themselves, there's definitely some xenophobia there, but I wouldn't necessarily say that they like come across as any specific like ethnic minority or something, like, because you could easily see how the, you know, small conservative American town, some people come in from out of town taking their jobs. It's really not like that. Like, these are just, they don't come across like they don't fit very many of the stereotypes when you see like American anti-immigration propaganda, you know, like, other than the fact that, you know, okay, they're dangerous, they're killers, their culture is very different, but other than that, it's really not like, and that is very fortunate because, you know, it bears repeating, one of the first, possibly the first, cinematic vampire, Nosferatu, was steeped in anti-Semitic tropes. You know, the appearance and some of the behavior and just, yeah. So I'm really glad that they don't really do that here. Like, I was really trying to figure out about the language, and it kind of seems like it's so different from any known language, and it's not like any one specific language either. You know, there's some traits, like there's this guttural quality to some of the language. There's these clicks and just, yeah. It's not really, it doesn't make you think of any one specific language, and it was developed for the film. They didn't take a language that they figured, oh, this will sound creepy to Americans. Yeah, let's see, yeah, it's not super misogynistic. Like, I kept, on my initial viewing, this is not my first viewing, but, you know, years ago when I first watched this, I kept worrying that, is this going to be the scene where it gets misogynistic? And it never really happens. Like, the female characters in this movie, you know, they contribute. Some of them partake in the violence. They, you know, they help. You know, it's one of those horror movies where there's a group, and they discuss. They try to figure out, what do we do next. And yeah, the women in this film actually have suggestions. You know, they you know, and they're actually acknowledged. You know, that, you know, I forget, if, I'm not sure anyone outright says, oh, that's a really good point, but like, you can tell it actually changes. You know, they'll say something, and, you know, someone else will actually suggest something that takes that into account. You know, and to be clear, you know, where that came off as possibly misogynistic, I'm not saying that women in real life don't have ideas. I'm saying there's a lot of American media where they don't get to say, you know, and that, unfortunately, there's a lot of people who think that women don't have good ideas because there's so much media, mainstream media, that doesn't let them actually suggest things when, like, in real life, like, a lot of the best decisions were made by women, or in, you know, yeah, in council with women, such and such. Yeah, like, there's an early scene where two guys are like hitting on the same girl at the same time, and yeah, you know, there were a couple of seconds there where I was like, I don't like where this is going, but then, you know, we see her clearly consent to where their mind is at, and it kind of seems like this wasn't the first time. It seems like they're initiating, but it's not the first time it's happened, and she's consented before, and they don't really go too far before they get clear consent from her. So no, it's just like they probably just have a thing where, yeah, it's perfectly fine. And to be clear, like, there's nothing wrong with that in real life either. It's just about, you know, just make sure you have consent. You know, the first time you'll want to be really, really careful, and then you'll want to talk with her, and, you know, down the line, after, you know, maybe even the second time, but after that first time, yeah, like, a lot of women do really like when a guy, you know, initiates. It's just about making sure there's consent, and that is, you know, that first time, if you don't know each other really well yet, she might feel pressured into it, and, you know, it might not be, you know, what's the word? Enthusiastic consent, which you really, yeah, that's what it should be. Josh Hartnett's character, Eben. Apparently, his last name isn't Flo, which I do think, if there were particularly many white people who could rap, would be a decent rapper name. He has an ex-wife, Melissa George's Stella, and again, I kept waiting for there to be some kind of really misogynistic thing, and I do think that some of the friends of the exes push a little bit too hard. There's this thing about if you're gonna spend time around us, you better tell us what went wrong between the two of you. But then she says, there's not enough time in the world for me to tell you that, and they kind of seem to accept it, So maybe it was just this playful thing of just that's their way of expressing it's really too bad that that it didn't work out for the two of you. Do you want to talk about it? And she says no, and that's kind of that. And that again, there's not really anything wrong with that. And yeah, to return to the tangent, there isn't really any point where there's this major misogynistic thing. I kept thinking, oh, are they gonna have something about, oh, she cheated on him, or she just always complained and so he couldn't stand. No, there's never anything like that, and they do clearly still care about each other. That's another thing. There's a lot of misogynists who think that when a relationship ends, that by definition means the woman no longer cares about him. There's that Aerosmith song, which the title escapes me at the moment, but there's this thing about there goes my old girlfriend, that's another diamond ring, and there's something I guess all those late night promises, they just didn't mean a thing. And it's what makes you so sure that they didn't mean a thing? They might still mean something. That just, yeah. Moving on. There really wasn't any. There's a tiny bit of misogyny, perhaps, but for a horror movie, it's really not too intense. I was also a little bit worried about, this is a cast with a lot of white people, and it is set in, I want to say, Alaska. Not everyone there is white, but there are a couple. Let's see, Manu Bennett, I want to say Maori descent. Crap, I forget what. There was at least one other actor, and yeah, he also has some of that, so it's not quite like Native American, at least not for Manu Bennett, but it is at least indigenous. They didn't just find an Italian guy and say, this is a Native American person, be sad when he's sad. Which really sucks, because it kind of drew too much attention away from the fact that, yeah, littering is a major problem. I think that covers all the different things. Yeah, just, it's the conservative values here are fairly mild, and it's stuff that I really think is, it's almost too bad that it's thought of as, primarily conservative, because I think they are just good values across the board. Stuff like, you taking care of your family and, protecting people. It is again one of these things of oh, the only way to protect people is to be a gun owner and this thing. But yeah, I think that covers the conservatism. Yeah, I feel like it does a really great job having a good variety. You never know exactly if you're gonna get a scene of tension, if it's gonna be especially suspenseful, if it's gonna be action. And to be clear, I don't always define well enough when I make a distinction between a tense scene and a suspenseful one. Tense is if there's a vampire right over here, right now he's facing away, there's a human right here, are they gonna be able to get out the door or get to a weapon or something like that before the vampire turns back around? That's a tense scene. A suspenseful scene is is the human walking through the house. We don't know if there's a vampire around. Action is self-explanatory, and yeah, you know, they do a decent job of making the different attacks, of which there is a pretty decent amount. Yeah, you know, there's enough differences between the different ones, and yeah, the action manages to incorporate pretty much every element that there's at all, you know, accessible, considering the specific setting and situation. The cinematography, like, this has some breathtaking, striking visuals, and some of them are right out of the comic. So that, you know, I'm one of those people who think that it's fine to do. I don't always think it's necessary to do a very direct adaptation. This is a fairly direct adaptation, from what I understand. I like when you reinvent something in an adaptation. I don't think that makes it a bad adaptation. And I think we gotta get better, you know, in film talk circles at making that distinction. Like, it's fine to hate a, you know, a loose adaptation is really the term I'm looking for. I think it's fine to, if you absolutely hate it, but to just call it a bad adaptation, I think, because there is such a thing as a bad adaptation. I would argue a bad adaptation is something that truly does not understand the source material, and essentially maybe just takes the title of the original and then does something that makes it clear it doesn't at all understand. Like, I would argue you know, not an adaptation, but the prequel, remake, reboot of The Thing from, I want to say, 2011, you know, that really doesn't understand what works about The Thing 1982. The Thing 1982, very loose adaptation. It's essentially, it's not really a remake of the 50s original, which, you know, not exactly my favorite 50s sci-fi, but it holds up. It's pretty good. There's some others there that I absolutely love, like Incredible Shrinking Man, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, stuff like that. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, way more paranoid, like the original short story that The Thing from the 50s is based on. I don't know why The Thing is not super paranoid, but yeah. In some ways, The Thing 1982 is a loose adaptation of the original short story, but it clearly understands. You know, the changes, I think, make a lot of sense. But yeah, so yes, striking visuals. You know, especially some of the establishing shots, like right at the start of the movie, where like there's this image of this massive ship, very, you know, very. It's close enough to the town that it matters for the, you know, and some of the first shots of the town itself, to, you know, establishing shots. Just print them out and put them on a wall. Just stunning looking. But the camera work also employs some handheld. And I am one of those people who think that handheld can work. You just got to do it right. And there's certain movies that absolutely should not have it. I am so happy, I can hardly put it into words, that Sam Raimi, like, I haven't watched every movie he's made, but I don't think he's embraced handheld in any of his movies. His visuals really go well with a traditional cinematography. But handheld, you know, it puts you right there, and it has a level of intensity that is not impossible, but perhaps more difficult to achieve with traditional cinematography. This movie does not have anywhere near as much handheld as the Bourne movies. I think that choice works in the Bourne movies, where, you know, from the second one onwards is essentially constant, and that kind of has this vibe where you feel like any minute, you know, any second now, something big could happen. It won't necessarily be an action scene, but something that really changes things. And this movie wants to go for a bit more suspense at times, at least. And some of the time we're just meeting characters, early on, we're just meeting characters, and handheld would feel incredibly awkward for that. I am of the opinion that this movie has the exact right amount and level of shakiness of shaky cam. I've seen some really take issue with it. I 100% understand hating it, and definitely, like, I remember 2007. I remember thinking, is this just the status quo now? Is every action and horror movie gonna have handheld, you know? And there were definitely movies around that time that had too much. I'm not sure I can think of one off the top of my head, and I did not think to think of examples before I started recording. But there's definitely some where it's just way too much. They didn't understand that you have to, like, it's a tool. Every tool, you gotta think about how you're using it. No tool works for every situation, and any tool can be used too much even in the right situation. I do take issue with those who say that they simply could not see what was going on. I appreciate that there's definitely a couple of times, there's maybe 2 sequences, where it's very difficult to make out the exact details. But I think it is misleading to characterize it as you can't see at all what's going on. You can pick up just enough that you can see. Like, yeah, of one example of a movie that definitely overuses it would be the first Hunger Games movie. That one, there are times where you can't see what's going on, and it's their way of hiding the violence. And then thankfully for the second and onwards, they just do that thing where they imply the violence. It's just barely off screen, instead of shaking the camera so much that you can't even really make out. Here, like, yeah, there's times, sometimes, like, the camera will be fairly shaky, and, like, over the course of it shaking, someone, a character will go flying from one part of the image through to another part. And despite it shaking, you can make out, okay, someone definitely went flying through. And there wasn't a single time where I couldn't tell who it was. And I think that's enough considering how short most of the time. No, yeah, the times where it's especially important for it to not go completely wild with the shaky cam, I would argue they don't use it for too long at a time. And as such, it's okay that you can't make out every single... Because, again, handheld, one of the big appeals of it, for those of us who like it, is that it puts you right there. And, yeah, it's supposed to be chaotic. It has that... It's somewhat reminiscent of the Normandy landing in the movie Saving Private Ryan. You can't make out every single little thing that's happening. It's overwhelming. It's chaotic. That's the idea. It puts you right in the shoes of the characters, who also can't make out every single little detail, but they can make out enough to know, okay, that character certainly went flying. And I think that just about covers the technical... it's like, knowing that none of the snow in this movie is real makes it really impressive, because, like, it always looks real, and yeah, they got, like, for the snowstormy parts, they got this substitute thing that doesn't hurt to inhale, so they don't have to wear, and it's because it's not cold, it's not going to completely screw up, like, if you've been in intense cold, like, it's difficult to focus on anything other than just getting to a place that's hot, which makes acting very difficult. So again, really, really smart, because they filmed in New Zealand, which, I don't know, maybe there's parts of it, of New Zealand, that are really cold, but this was not one of those parts. I think that covers absolutely every technical aspect. Some people feel that the characters are too thinly sketched. I would argue there is just enough to latch onto. And again, it's a 102-minute movie. They don't, there's a few too many characters for all, for them to just really flesh out every single one of them. And it's one of those things where, like, okay, if a character gets a ton of backstory or development early on, you're going to pay special attention to them, and it's either going to be, okay, that character is definitely going to make it to the end of the movie, otherwise why would they bother? Or, wait, maybe they're going to die soon, they're going to try to subvert my expectations, and you're like metagaming, you're trying to figure out, what are they doing with this character? And because they don't really do that with any character, like, there's some characters that you know almost nothing about, but a decent chunk of them you know just enough. It's clear who the protagonist, like Josh Hartnett is unquestionably the protagonist here, but some of the major characters get about, not quite as much perhaps, but not way less characterization than he does. And yeah, you're not necessarily ever really forgetting that Josh Hartnett is the protagonist. He's the sheriff. He makes a lot of decisions for the tactics of the situation. The final decision, he does listen to feedback. But yeah, I wouldn't really say that there was any character that I just immediately pegged as, okay, they're gonna die. Like, humans and vampire characters. By and large, I didn't know exactly, like, mentioned that I've watched this multiple times. There was actually a character or two that I completely forgot how long they lasted in the movie, because they managed to make it feel natural that they make it that far, and yeah, it just long enough passed between two viewings that I forgot, and I didn't immediately pick up on it, which is, again, you want to try to avoid that in a horror movie, because part of the thing is we're wondering who's going to die, when, and how. And let's see. I think that pretty much covers... Yeah, like every major character, there's at least one thing about them that you know, and I don't know if you would necessarily say all of them are likable, certainly not equally, but you remember them, and this is also a movie that does a good job with setup and payoff. Some people have felt some of the payoffs were unsatisfactory, but I would argue everything has, every bit of setup has a payoff. Sometimes it's not at all in the way you think, and I would argue there's at least one thing that has multiple payoffs, but yeah, there was nothing that was truly just forgotten about. And I think that might just about cover... I don't think that this was like super mean-spirited in the violence and such. There's a bit or two that arguably go into that, but that was something I had kind of forgotten. I watched it a couple of months ago again. I had forgotten how somewhat mean-spirited and certainly gratuitous some of the violence and gore in Daybreakers is, where there's definitely a couple of times in that where you just end up kind of numb from how much there is, where I'm not sure I would really say that was the case here. Yeah. 7 caught in the absolute worst place to deal with a bunch of vampires out of 10. And yeah, the DVD is pretty good. There's a pretty good amount of special features. I think it's like, hold on, I have it right here, 79 minutes or so. I think it was 72. The cover says 79. I'm pretty sure it's 72, but that's pretty good. Of behind the scenes, and yeah, it's quite good. I really felt like they covered everything. There was nothing where I was, by the end, I was still like, but what about that aspect? Yeah, and they're legitimately engaging to listen to, the various cast and crew. Yeah, that takes us into the spoiler section. So I'm gonna note the time code immediately, and let's see. So it is. There we go. So yeah, notes taken while watching, although this will probably be the only spoiler section. So I suppose I'll start with, that thing about, early on, Eben is kind of a little bit worried about all those names. His brother, his younger brother. You know, there's that thing about, you know, you're smoking weed, and you know the first payoff to the weed smoke is, you know, UV light can hurt a vampire, but you know, a little later, you know, just before he goes to self-sacrifice, he also, you know, acknowledges, you know, you really, you did good. You're, you know, like, it's that thing of, you know, protective older brother. He's worried about, you know, is his kid brother gonna end up, you know, doing the wrong thing? Does he, you know, how much does he need to watch over him? That kind of thing. That is, I suppose, also a bit of a conservative thing of this, you know, drugs, you know, but then they do also have, you know, the let's see, the grandmother, I want to say it is, of you know, it's medicinal, you know. No, it actually does help. And Eben doesn't launch into this tirade about, no, that's just something the liberal media wants you to believe. No, he's just, you know, he's annoyed at it, and he still doesn't like his brother using. But yeah, it is true. The you know, there is medicinal use for marijuana, and that was something, you know, in 2007. Actually, yeah, it's slightly progressive to be like, no, there's a reason for it. And I think, did she say it was? I think she even said specifically what it was like muscle pain, maybe arthritis. I think she said it was, and yeah, it's absolutely true. And thankfully, it's provided a ton of pain relief for, you know, people dealing with arthritis in places where it's legal, possibly in places where it's not. Let's see how chronological I can get with this one. So the start, I appreciate that, like, I think it's maybe half an hour before anything really big happens in this. You know, there's a little bit. There's these little, you know, the stranger comes into town, very very Western of them, and you know, but yeah, by and large, it's set up. You know, we're meeting characters, we're getting a sense of the place, we're learning the rules. You know, there's that line about, you know, I know you can't take an entire month of no sunlight. I think she knows, but now the audience does as well, so I'll forgive it. It's slightly clunky, if we're being honest, but the yeah, you know, it's clear that this is something they're used to. They have, like, a set plan. Like, there's not a single Barrow, I think it's called, resident who's like, what just happened? Like, everybody's familiar with it. You know, setting up, they know how this, you know, goes. And they're not really expecting trouble. You know, they're thinking this, you know, it's the same as always, you know, happens every year. And, you know, we're getting a little bit of, like, relationships between different characters. You know, Mark Boone Jr. gets a citation so that, you know, he'll feel he's part of this town. Meanwhile, he's clearly quite frustrated, which also, like, dude, that's not necessary. There's other ways to make him feel like he's part of the town. But yeah, you know, Mark, like, he's like, should have stayed in the city, had a good thing going, tricking, you know, Guy Pearce into paying 2 rents because he can't remember, you know, refusing to look Tom Cruise directly in the eyes. Was that him, or was that just an actor who reminds me of him? But, you know, at the end of the day, he always remembers, right, Batman. Don't want to deal with that again. And, you know, the let's see, we have the yeah, you know, Stella is trying to get out of town so that she doesn't have to yeah, spend all that time there. And, you know, car accident means she gets, you know, she's late to the, you know, and yeah, she does end up getting to stay, and she gets to, you know, be part of taking down the stranger, arresting him, not, I suppose, taking down, but yeah, you know, she points a gun directly at him, and yeah, they manage to, yeah, I'm gonna talk about the stranger because One of the best exchanges here is the, I'd like some raw hamburger. Meat only comes in two ways around here: frozen and burnt. And yeah, just like the entire look of him, the black teeth, and the yeah, he looks kind of messed up. Like, this is a character that like so easily could be super boring, because we've seen this before. We've seen Dracula. Certainly those of us who haven't should. There's some amazing Dracula versions out there. It's Renfield. It's Renfield. That's, yeah, and some of the writing and the performance just really makes the character come alive, or undead, if you will. When he's in the cell and he's like taunting them, the thing, you can try to run, you can try to hide, but they'll get ya. They're coming. And that part where, let's see, he manages to provoke Eben's brother. So so the brother throws like plastic, like I think they're playing a board game or something, and Stranger's like, thanks for the plastic, I can warp it and use it to get my way out of here. And Eben's brother, I sympathize, because I'm not gonna lie, I might fall for that too. He runs up, to get the plastic, and of course the stranger wasn't gonna mess with the plastic. He can't. The plastic would break. I don't speak from experience, but I'm pretty sure it would break if he tried that. But now he has a machine gun. I mean, a hostage. And yeah, gunshot and just, yeah, that's very, very cool, very tense, and the just, yeah. I have really liked Ben Foster in everything that he's been in, including, he's even good in X-Men: The Last Stand, although he has entirely too little screen time, which I think is at least part of the reason that, I want to say it was Eben shot him. But yeah, I've liked him in everything I've seen him in. I do prefer when he is scraggly and dirty and disgusting, like he is here and in Punisher 2004. It's just, maybe part of it is that it's so different from how he's, like, I've seen a little bit of Interview, and he's just this kind, soft-spoken, like he thinks about his answers, and he, yeah. So the reason I made that particular acting choice was that I felt that this character had experienced this, but and just to see him just like really, really nasty, just it just 100% works. And in the behind the scenes they talk about, the moment he's on set, he's just in character. It just, like, yeah, which really helps the other actors. And yeah, once, like, for a while, he's gleeful, because he's like, they're gonna turn me. This is my big, I've been doing this for a while now, and they keep promising they'll turn me, and now they're actually gonna turn me. And then they come back, and he's like, they didn't take me. Just the devastation. This destroyed his illusions, and he plays it so well. Let's see. I think that pretty much brings us to the, love the tactics. The dogs are taken out, which, their barking would warn in case of Terminators or vampires, which I suppose is more relevant. You never know. I think most movies would be improved by the appearance of a Terminator. But yeah, the cutting the power, these couple of things, yeah, very, very strategic. The strategery is on point. And let's see, the shot from above of just the chaos and carnage of various vampires, attacking, and the blood spraying. It just, like, it must have taken forever to plan, and it looks so good. Like, yeah, I figure there's probably a comic panel or two that looks exactly like that. Otherwise, I might have guessed like Brian De Palma inspiration or something, but just, yeah, fantastic. You know, really, really good classic camera work kind of thing. Bird's eye view, which really helps out because it kind of, you end up feeling like, okay, they're just inescapable. They're all over the place, and they're so effective. You know, it's you end up feeling like how are the human characters going to survive the rest of this movie? This is like day one, I think, of 30. You know, so just, yeah. And let's see, we have the the part where, you know, he turns not very long after, but, you know, there's that one guy. Let's, you know, it starts with, you know, they're just in the house, and they're, you know, clearly distraught, disturbed by the circumstance, and then window breaks, and, you know, vampires attack, and it's just, yeah, really, really tense and intense. And yeah, you know, we see, actually I forget if it's the same, but there's a point where, you know, no, yeah, I think, you know, she's like under the house, like, please help me, you know, and just like kind of a reverse Pennywise sewer situation, and the vampire is just waiting for the guy to come close to, like, you know, pull, you know, because he can't turn her into bubbles is why. And the you know, yeah, not long after, Eben shows up, finds the guy. Clearly, you know, he's really distraught. You know, he's starting to turn, so he's also not, you know, he's no longer like forming full sentences. You know, and I do really appreciate, I think they use it well, the fact that you don't turn immediately, you know, which, again, set up, you might not even expected that to be set up, because it's tense in the situation, because you're like, oh, he's turning. I really hope the human realizes that this guy is turning before it's too late, you know. And then by the end, you know, Eppen injects himself, knowing, you know, there's going to be just enough time for me to take out, I want to say his name is Harlow. But yeah, you know, Eppen, you know, talking to this guy, and the guy's like, took Allie. That is something you want to be careful about doing. That is how Bruce Wayne lost his parents. But that also led to him becoming Batman, and it is how Kyle Reese found himself a pair of pants, which John specifically told him was gonna be the first thing he was gonna want to do, and he didn't fight that instinct. Fair enough, Allie's, you're cool. But yeah, let's see, that brings us to, yeah, I quite like that, you know, part of it is them, like, finding a place to hide and staying put, and some trouble arises because, you know, they gotta go for supplies eventually, and, you know, this poor guy with Alzheimer's, and we get, you know, we just briefly get this thing about, you know, he's like, where's your mother? Mom died years ago, Dad, you know, and, you know, when you just hear that, you're like, oh, it's, you know, poor thing, he keeps forgetting, and his son has to keep reliving, you know, just, both of them have to keep going back through that. But then not long after he leaves, you know, and he's like, I gotta go find your mother, you know, it's, didn't even think it was set up, but there's the payoff, you know, he's gonna needlessly endanger himself because he thinks that his wife is alive out there and in danger, you know, he's being a good husband, a good provider. And let's see, appreciate that Joel Tobeck. I don't know, does he just play scummy characters in general? Because he, like, yeah, he's good at it. I'm not complaining. And let's see, you know, they go for the supplies, and, you know, the girl, who is, like, perhaps the most verbal of the vampires, at least when it comes to speaking in English, but then she might not have turned very long ago. So, you know, no, it works. It just stood out to me a little bit. But yeah, I'm done playing with this one. Do you want to play with me? And just, yeah, you know, this is not the only horror movie from around this time that had a kid that had been turned into the undead, and, yeah, in each of these it's super creepy, so I'm not complaining. And yeah, this thing of like they pick her up and they chop her head off, and yeah, it's one of those things because like yeah, you know she's tiny compared to them, and they're I think there's three or more of them picking her up, so yeah, it's credible that they'd be able to, and she wouldn't be able to fight them off because her limbs are not quite long enough to you know, and she did manage to turn that one of them, you know, and yeah, you know, chop that head off, and apparently at the risk of ruining that scene for you 100%. In the behind the scenes, apparently the biggest problem when working with that actress was getting her to stop smiling. Because she's having the time of her life. She's just, you know, in the, you see some of it in the behind the scenes. Other than that, it's I think it's the director saying, you know, that's the problem with her, you know. But yeah, she's like smiling. It's just, and at one point she like perfectly delivers what I guess is, it's not a line from the movie, so I'm guessing maybe she came up with it, maybe an adult came up with it and told her. I don't know exactly, but she says it perfectly. Just this super creepy line, and just yeah, you know. Because she's getting to play, she's getting to run around and being carried, and you know all this fun stuff. Saying something super creepy, just yeah. And let's see. And yeah, you know, at that point, you know, Eben's brother is really struggling with this, which you know, understandable. And I really appreciate that they didn't feel the need to do, you know, this thing of like, oh, I can't do that, she's just a child kind of thing. But no, it's after, you know, he does the thing, because that is very psychologically, not that the other one isn't also, but it's very psychologically accurate. Sometimes you're able to do something extreme, you know, adrenaline, the situation, and then right after you're like, what did I do, you know, kind of thing. Let's see, I think that about covers that part. Let's see. Yeah, I quite like the part with yeah the UV light thing. You know, it's very clever, and I do appreciate, you know, clearly Eben wasn't taken completely aback, because yeah, like it's not going to work on all of them. You're not going to be able to take out all of them with that one, you know, lamp. Not all of them are just gonna walk right through the door like that. And let's see, but yeah, you know, she gets badly burnt and like apologizes to Marcus von Skyver. And let's see, right, yeah, at one point, like this one human, you know, character is like pleading, you know, for mercy or something along those lines, that kind of vibe at least. And she says something like, "Oh God," and I want to say his name is Harlow. You know, he like looks directly. I think, does he maybe even like kneel down? She's like sitting down. You know, he kneels down, looks her right in the eye with those, you know, black eyes of his. He's like, you know, he doesn't say a huge amount in English. Most of it's in the other language. By the way, love the part where he like starts a record and then plays it with his long nail. That was also great. But yeah, you know, looks her right in the eye and says, "No God," which, like, okay, I can deal with vampires. He's also an anti-theist. Oh no. To be clear, yes, I used to be an anti-theist. I was never one of the anti-SJW ones, and I'm working on not being anti-theistic anymore. I appreciate, you know, when I was one, I was super obnoxious, a complete asshole. And now I am at least working on those things about myself. Let's see, then we have the, but yeah, you know, still an atheist, more of a secularist. I would rather, you know, befriend a religious person who agrees with secularism than an atheist who is an asshole and maybe doesn't even necessarily care about anything other than atheism. That's one of the major reasons I ended up leaving the, you know, I'm barely subscribed to any YouTube atheists, any fellow YouTube atheists anymore. You know, a lot of them just said assholey things or revealed that, yeah, you know, they're reactionary in other ways, or in ways, you know, atheism isn't technically reactionary as such, but yeah. Let's see. I think that brings us nicely to the... Yeah, I appreciate that, the guy who was bitten by the little girl, he goes out on his own terms. And let's see. There's the... Billy, there's the signaling, and they find him distraught, lonely. That's why he signaled them. That and fear of the dog, and he was getting kind of tired of sniping the undead. But yeah, let's see, the bloodstains. He killed his own family and was going to suicide. He didn't want them to die like that. And yeah, it is really, really devastating to see. Imagine having to kill your own family like that, to feeling like that's the better option there. And let's see, not long after, we get the payoff to the previously set up Muffin Monster, which I have to imagine is the overprotective older brother of the Muffin Man. The Muffin Man. The Muffin Man. Don't you know the Muffin Man? He lives on Drury Lane. Anyway, which I guess means that the Muffin Monster was just, like, otherwise occupied for at least one notable scene in the Shrek franchise. But yeah, some people felt that the Muffin Monster was used too little. I disagree. I thought it was absolutely epic when the tackle and knocking the vampire and it just disappears into the really, really very, very cool. Let's see, and I think the CGI is pretty decent on that. I felt like when some of the oil moving was a little iffy, but other than that, the CGI was convincing, and there really wasn't too much of it. It wasn't overused. Let's see, and as a quick example, they used, like, they said CG, I think, in the behind the scenes, but they must have meant, like, I don't think it's CG. Anyway, but when they're cutting the girl's head off, they made an actual, practical head. And in general, when someone is, like, what's it called, dismembered, that sort of thing, they actually made a practical, the limb that was torn or cut or whatever. Yeah, they made a practical one, and the part where they cut they use an axe to cut through a thing. They also had a practical thing there. Obviously, that was not on the little girl, because that might have been scaring the little girl. But yeah, they used, like, compositing to sell the effect, but there was a lot of practical effect stuff going on there instead of having a CG head, which wouldn't be the only Josh Hartnett horror movie to have something like that. Let's see, and Billy ends up, losing a hand, and, he's turning, you see it on the teeth, and he starts emitting these horrible wails, like the other vampires. And I think it's Eben, one of the other characters, like, just chops his head clean off, which I feel like was a slightly exaggerated way to criticize his singing ability. That was, tough but fair. But right. Holy crap. Obviously, we got to talk about Mark Boone Jr. with I forget what he calls it, but the little car, with the like chainsaw thing on the front that he cuts through, you know, and I think at one point he like impales one and it, you know, gets cut off, and just really, really epic. And, you know, he sets fire to, or yeah, uses a flare to light the you know, yeah, the dynam, yeah, boom goes the dynamite, yeah, right. And he gets like a I think he puts on his back a bear trap. I doubt that this isn't already in a video. That there's got to be survival horror games out there with bear traps. Actually, I think I might know of at least one, but it's kind of a spoiler for that game. But that's too cool of a weapon to not, you know. And yeah, it was quite cool. You know, he has it on the back of the car, and one of the vampires like steps in it, and, you know, because it's like tied to the truck, vampire gets dragged like he's the main character on Twitter. And just like, so I'm just gonna pitch it real quick, just in case, you know. Please put in the comments. I'm not gonna promise that I'm necessarily gonna play it, but I would like to. There's gotta be games out there where you get to use a bear trap as a weapon, because it could be a one-hit kill, like melee weapon, like the whatever creature comes really close, and you like just smack it in the head with that thing. It shuts on the head, and yeah, it could be like a thing you have on your back, and the first creature that attacks your back dies instantly. You know, again, one-hit kill. You could like put it down as a proximity mine kind of thing. You could throw it just a short distance, not asking for like an absolutely absurd, like a shotgun level kind of effective range kind of thing, you know. And I think that brings us to the ending. Yeah, super tense when Stella is hiding, you know, and the vampires are looking, and, you know, she's hiding there with, I think the character's name is Gail, who I guess went to go home and like freshen up, and didn't go well. It was kind of a bloodbath. And yeah, you know, there's that thing about, you know, if she stays, if she leaves, they find her. If she stays, she burns to death, you know. So yeah, you know, Eben realizes he has to do, you know, the big thing, because, you know, that there was kind of a thing around this time. If you're gonna have a vampire in a horror action movie, there's probably gonna be a big epic fight between vampire and maybe fellow vampire, maybe a human that's somewhat mixed up, you know, something. And yeah, I don't think I even have to say, but, you know, obviously, I suppose it's arguably spoiler, but yeah, there were others around this time. And, you know, yeah, he walks right up to Harlow, I think his name is. And, you know, Harlow's like, wow, this guy, I mean, I guess 30 days of vampire rampaging in constant seeming nighttime has a similar effect on him as 40 days of celibacy. That movie was really messed up. But honestly, instead of me going into, I'm gonna real quick find, I'm gonna put in the description box, because there was an excellent video that talks about all the, let's see, it's called 40 Days and 40 Nights, and I believe that, was it, let's see, yeah, Yara Zaid, I believe is how you pronounce it. I'm gonna make sure to put the link in the description box so that, let's see, there we go. Yes. Yeah, I really appreciate that the final fight feels real. It doesn't feel over choreographed, like a couple of blows miss or don't quite have the effect that, you know, there's a tackle that doesn't go exactly as planned, for example. And let's see, yeah, you know, it's always fun when the villain is like, look at this guy, and then tries to attack back, and it's like, oh no, you know, I didn't expect that kind of thing. It's just, sometimes I like the simple things in life, you know. It appeals to the Van Damme fan in me. And let's see. And now I want to watch Lionheart again, even though I watched it like a couple of months ago. But it is just that good of a movie. I think that covers... Yeah, and yeah, we have the bit at the end where, you know, the tragic death of a major character, is, you know, vampire being exposed to sunlight, which was also a thing in vampire movies around this time. And I really appreciate that the movie understands there's not really anything left after that. Like, I've seen some say, you know, oh, well, what about the other vampires kind of thing? I mean, now that people know, you know, like, they're gonna tell, you know, because they specifically say, oh, you know, next year they're gonna attack this other town. I mean, tell them that this is, you know, like, Stella is, I feel like, probably going to be believed. You know, she is like some kind of law enforcement government thing, you know, and there's all the other the various other witnesses, you know, everyone who survived the movie up to that point is going to be able to say, no, I saw it with my own eyes, you know. And yeah, and because the whole place wasn't burnt, if they get just one vampire body moved out of the sun in time, you know, they can say, no, come here, you know, bring a forensic specialist. What do you make of this? You know, can we agree that this is not human? You know, do a DNA test. Like, clearly the blood has some impact. You know, compare the blood to human blood. Just don't let Weyland Yutani get their hands on that blood, that's all. And let's see. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they were like trying to say, you know, oh, sequel bait kind of thing. I kind of just got the feeling that they were like, you know, in the long term, we're going to win. I think it would have been, like, considering there's like a dozen vampires there at the end. I don't know. I mean, I guess we could have seen all of them burn up in sunlight. I don't think it's a problem that we see them leave like that. You know, there's only so many places on Earth that has a lot of nighttime. You know, they're gonna... I mean, yeah, maybe just in general, you know, they could say, you know, here's... You know, they could spread the word to, like, they could say, okay, what's a realistic amount of miles for them to travel, you know, and yeah, get word out to all those places, and yeah, just tell them, you know, decapitation, you know, UV light of any kind, you know, yeah, that sort of thing. Like, the vampires are going to have a much harder time, you know, now, and based on how she worded it, it sounded like, you know, when she said, oh, next year they'll be at this, you know, yeah, so the 30 days of night have ended for the surrounding areas. The vampires are either going to have to wait an entire year, during which, you know, people around maybe know about it and are ready to fight, or they're going to have to feed, like, really, really soon and expose themselves to people who, again, might have been told. I really don't think that it's a bad ending. I think it was the right note to end the movie on. Yeah, that is it for this one. And let's see. Yeah, hope to catch you in one of the upcoming videos. And yeah,